Okay, so this video is a quick overview of what to focus on as you read culture and psychiatric diagnosis section of the DSM. So, as I've probably mentioned in earlier videos, this is a brand new section to the DSM, or essentially new. There's a good bit here that we're going to focus on and talk about. And when I read this, I was reading it for the first time, just as you guys were. Um, I will say that in terms of reading, I think I've noted this in the pages. You can stop at page 873 at the where the examples of cultural concepts of distress. I'm looking at the book if you didn't already gather that. So it's interesting, and I read it, thought it was interesting, just to look at some of the history of how sort of vocabulary of how things are, or how distress and stress and mental challenges, mental health issues are sort of what they're called in different cultures. So, but given the volume of reading that we have, and there's a lot here that's really good to focus on, I decided it didn't make sense to we can cut it off there. Read that if you have time and feel motivated to. I did, thought it was really interesting. But for required readings and for the test and whatnot, you can stop at 873 there at the end of that subsection. All right, so going back to page 859, the beginning of the chapter, the definition of person-centered cultural assessment, integrating culture and social context in clinical diagnosis. So there's concepts that are hallmarks of social work, integrated health, person-centered assessment, person-centered treatment plans, things that we're looking at our clients, each individual, and their combination of symptoms and circumstances are uniquely theirs. Okay, and making sure we're tailoring our intervention planning towards that. Okay, so there's some more stuff on going down to this first subsection on key terms, the definition of race and ethnicity and culture, and I have this called out in the lecture material too. But that key term section, I folks sort of read that one pretty carefully. Outline for cultural formulation. Again, there's a lot of I think very relevant stuff there for us. So read all that stuff pretty closely, and I'll call out what I think are sort of the most salient points, and I'll add a little more context to them in the lecture, the text lecture note, my textual lecture notes, as well as video to accompany it. So the definition, going on to the next page, the definition of the cultural formulation interview. So you want to make sure you feel comfortable with that. Just some things about what the cultural formulation view is, how it came, not so much how it came about, but what's involved in it. Just read that pretty carefully. I think most of the stuff that I highlighted here, and you'll see this in my lecture content, was on the first page on 862, and I have a couple notes on the next page, 863. Now, as we get to the templates, you guys can probably, well, it reads backwards, but just so you get the idea, when you get to page 864, look through those. I'm not going to ask you questions from the templates themselves, nor am I going to go over them in great detail in lecture. Again, they're worth looking at, and just sort of, ask me a question if you don't understand what anything is. Think of them more as reference material. I'm not going to ask you a question directly from these templates. And so that, those 4 pages. look through actually more than that. So those four, going on to 816, the informant version. Again, just look through it, but you don't need to read it word for word. You're not going to be. I'm not going to ask you a question on, how do we define past help seeking on page 870. I'm not going to ask you a question like that. Okay. So then, cultural concepts of distress, relevance for diagnostic assessment, um, definitions like culture bound syndrome, cultural syndrome, um, or how we migrated away from cultural bound syndrome as the old term, um, and what that means. And again, I talk about this a little bit more in the lecture videos and textual content. But those next couple pages, actually, that whole subsection on relevance for diagnostic assessment under cultural concepts of distress, I would definitely read that pretty carefully, with some important stuff there. I highlighted a bunch of stuff as I was reading it myself. Um, Examples of cultural concepts of distress. Oh, and that's it. So that's it. There's a lot in that, and that's why I cut the pages short. Because this 860 to 873, with the exception of those pages that just have the interview templates, read those really carefully. There's a lot of good stuff there, and I think it's really an enhancement to the DSM to really sort of bring in some of the social work aspects of this that we've tried to bring in for a long time, that are now really more formally part of the DSM, which I think is good. Okay, so that's the summary of the readings.